They erased her home. They silenced her people. And still, she never screamed, never begged, never ran. Because across the galaxy, tyrants didn't fear her weapons. They feared her name. Backhand index pointing right. If you love stories where humanity makes the galaxy kneel, subscribe now. They ruled the stars with fear for so long that fear had become invisible to them. It was simply the way the galaxy worked. Strong fleets crushed weak worlds. Ancient empires dictated law. Species learned their place or were erased. For centuries, no one questioned it, until a single human name began appearing in intercepted transmissions, abandoned battle plans, and panicked council briefings. At first, the tyrants laughed. Humans were latecomers. Fragile. Short-lived. Their territory sat on the edge of mapped space, tolerated only because it wasn't worth the effort to conquer. No empire had ever lost a war to them. No coalition had ever taken them seriously. So when reports arrived claiming entire invasion routes were being altered because of one human commander, the reaction was mockery. Then the laughter stopped. It began subtly. A Varkeen dread fleet preparing to burn a border system received a priority recall order. No reason given. Just a single encrypted line stamped with an unfamiliar designation. The fleet commander protested, until his superiors quietly removed him and ordered the ships home. On another front, a trade war abruptly ended when three rival empires signed an emergency non-aggression pact within the same hour. None of them explained why. Across the galaxy, war slowed. Not because of peace. Because of hesitation. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, a gathering so rare that entire civilizations paused their economies to listen. Dozens of species filled the chamber, scaled, chitinous, radiant, and mechanical, each representing powers that had crushed stars into submission. They argued loudly at first, dismissing rumors, accusing rivals of manipulation, insisting this was hysteria. Then one counselor spoke a single human name. The chamber fell silent. No holograms appeared. No images were shown. There was no dramatic evidence presented. Just that name, soft, simple, and unmistakably human. It had no translation in most galactic tongues, yet every delegate understood its weight. Not because of what she had done, but because of what stopped happening wherever her influence touched. Battles cancelled. Sieges abandoned. Fleets rerouted into deep space to avoid invisible lines no one remembered drawing. Entire tyrant dynasties delayed expansion plans they had prepared for generations. The galaxy had not seen restraint like this since the first empires learned the cost of mutual destruction. "What has she destroyed?" one warlord demanded, his voice shaking more with anger than fear. "Nothing," came the reply. "What world has she conquered?" "None." "What fleet has she annihilated?" Silence. That was the problem. She had not burned cities or cracked planets. She had not announced herself with overwhelming force. There were no victory parades, no recorded massacres, no shattered moons bearing her signature. And yet, wherever her name surfaced, dominance dissolved. Power structures weakened. Confidence collapsed. She was a human. Female. A commander by classification, though many argued the title was insufficient. No one agreed on her appearance. Some claimed she was young, others ancient. Some insisted she was surrounded by advanced war constructs, others that she traveled alone. The truth was unclear, by design. What was known, however, was her pattern. Every tyrant empire that dismissed humanity as insignificant had encountered her shadow soon after. Supply chains failed without sabotage. Loyal client species quietly withdrew support. Border systems rebelled without coordination. Intelligence networks turned unreliable, feeding perfect information one day and lethal misinformation the next. It felt as if someone had studied them. Deeply. Patiently. As if their own strategies had been disassembled, refined, and handed back to them with precision cuts. "She doesn't attack strength," a council analyst whispered. "She removes certainty." That phrase spread faster than the name itself. Certainty was the foundation of tyranny. The certainty that fear would work. That overwhelming force would always prevail. That weaker species would break before resisting. And now, for the first time in recorded galactic history, tyrants hesitated not because they feared retaliation, but because they no longer trusted the future they had planned. Humanity, as a whole, remained silent. No grand speeches were broadcast. No threats issued. Human fleets stayed within their borders. Trade continued. Diplomats smiled politely and offered cooperation like always. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. That only made the fear worse. Because tyrants understood something most species didn't. Silence, when chosen, is never weakness. Intelligence leaks suggested she had refused multiple opportunities to strike. Opportunities that would have guaranteed victory. Instead, she let enemies retreat. Let them reorganize. Let them breathe. It made no sense, until someone on the council dared to voice the truth. She's letting them live with what they've learned. That they were no longer alone at the top. That someone had mapped their psychology as thoroughly as their star charts. That for the first time, the galaxy had a human who didn't need to prove power. Because power was already assumed. The tyrants demanded action. Some called for her assassination. Others proposed total war against humanity before it was too late. But none could agree on how. Every projection ended the same way, with cascading failures, internal collapse, and outcomes that no longer favored the aggressor. One by one, the loudest voices grew quiet, because every tyrant had begun asking the same unspoken question. If she hasn't struck back yet, what happens when she decides to? And deeper still, a far more terrifying realization took hold. What if this wasn't humanity's retaliation? What if this was merely the warning? By the end of the session, the Galactic Council reached no resolution. They adjourned without declarations, without ultimatums, without confidence. Across the stars, fleets remained idle, commanders restless, and empires waited for permission to act that never came. All because of a human woman who had not fired a single shot. All because her name had become proof that humanity no longer needed to shout to be heard. And somewhere beyond the reach of their censors and fears, she continued to prepare, unseen, unhurried, and utterly unafraid. The galaxy thought humanity was fragile. They thought it small. They thought it weak. Entire alliances had dismissed humans as nothing more than a footnote in the history of stars. For centuries, humans had been tolerated, barely noticed, corners of the galaxy left untouched not out of respect, but because it wasn't worth the effort to conquer them. That arrogance was the mistake every tyrant made. She remembered the world that had been taken from her. Not in the sense of mere property but as home. A planet of her childhood, its oceans and forests, the people who had laughed, argued, loved, and lived there, all erased in a single coordinated strike by a coalition of empires. They claimed it was necessary to set an example, to remind humanity of its place. The official communications didn't hide cruelty, they flaunted it. Messages sent to surviving colonies were laced with contempt, every word dripping with superiority. Entire fleets were deployed to ensure no survivors could organize resistance. But the humans survived. Some barely. Most were gone. She was among the few left, not by luck, but because she had learned what survival required long before the first strike. Pain was not new to her. Loss was not shocking. Humanity had always endured. They had always adapted. She felt grief, yes, but grief sharpened into clarity. Every life taken, every world destroyed, became data. Every attack became a calculation. She did not scream, she did not cry. She did not rail against the sky. She studied. She prepared. The galaxy's cruelty had given her the most dangerous tool any commander could possess. Focus. The empire that destroyed her home expected despair. They expected fear. They expected a human response in kind, a retaliation fueled by emotion rather than strategy. Instead, they received silence. It was not empty silence. It was the kind of silence that comes before inevitability. It was the sound of a species that understood its vulnerability, acknowledged it, and then moved to exploit the weaknesses of its oppressors with surgical precision. She began quietly, within the remnants of humanity's scattered colonies. Survivors trained. Technologies salvaged from destroyed worlds were reverse-engineered. Ships that should have been lost were rebuilt, not bigger, not more powerful, but smarter. Humans had never relied solely on size or strength. They relied on intellect, on foresight, on improvisation. Every device, every maneuver, every tactic was a lesson learned from centuries of being underestimated, ignored, and attacked. Humanity became an organism honed to survive in a universe that wanted to see it crushed. Her reputation grew, whispered at first, in fragments of intercepted transmissions and damaged communications. Humans were no longer just survivors, they were a calculated threat. Stories of single ships outmaneuvering entire fleets, of worlds that should have fallen standing defiant against overwhelming odds, reached the ears of tyrants. Each report seemed impossible, until patterns emerged. These were not isolated acts of luck. They were strategy. They were planning. They were human. And she, the one who had watched her home burn, became the focus. She was not a symbol or a myth. Not yet. She was reality. Her leadership was invisible yet unmistakable. Orders moved faster than news. Fleets responded without question. Civilians adapted without hesitation. Every loss the galaxy had inflicted became a lesson applied universally. Her enemies would soon realize that the humans they had thought fragile had learned from every death, every setback, and every betrayal. They had survived where they should have been extinguished, and in surviving, they had become unstoppable. The galaxy expected an eruption of rage, a human reaction marked by immediate vengeance. Instead, she waited. Patience was her weapon. Every fleet, every planet, every empire she studied and mapped became a node in a network she controlled without firing a shot. She allowed the empires to continue their petty squabbles, to expose weaknesses in their arrogance. She let them make the mistakes they assumed humans would never anticipate. And when the time came, when she finally chose to act, the galaxy would not see a desperate human lashing out. They would see the execution of inevitability. Even within the council chambers and command fleets of her enemies, the name began to resonate. Humans were no longer ignored. They were no longer assumed weak. The whispers grew into quiet fear as transmissions highlighted the pattern. Humanity endured loss, adapted, and prepared. The galaxy had underestimated them at its peril. Every tyrant, every warlord, every leader who had dismissed humanity began to question their own assumptions. How had they not seen it? How had they not realized that a species capable of surviving annihilation was not just resilient, but lethal in its patience? The survivors she led were disciplined, focused, and unyielding. They trained as though every strike against them had already happened, anticipating moves their enemies had yet to make. Technologies destroyed on her homeworld were recovered and refined. Strategies once considered theoretical became operational reality. In every corner of human-controlled space, preparation was complete, efficiency perfected. Humanity did not cry for what it had lost. Humanity prepared for what it would make the galaxy pay for. And through all of it, she remained calm. The humans she led did not look to her for vengeance. They looked to her for certainty, for strategy, for clarity. They had witnessed the universe take everything from them and had chosen a path that the galaxy could not anticipate. They had learned that survival was not about strength alone. It was about knowing, adapting, and moving when the moment was undeniable. Humanity had been underestimated for centuries. That mistake was about to be corrected. The galaxy believed it had destroyed her, her people, her home. But in reality, it had created a force it could never control. She had been forged by loss, sharpened by strategy, and tempered by patience. Her people, scattered across the stars, had become the instruments of her inevitability. Tyrants would soon discover that crushing humans was not a risk, it was a trigger. Every empire that had ever sought to erase humanity had unknowingly trained the one who would determine the fate of them all. And she would not strike in anger. She would strike in certainty. The galaxy would soon learn that what it had assumed was weakness had always been strength. The human race had survived annihilation, and in doing so, had learned the value of every lost life, every destroyed world, every calculated delay. She had waited, and the galaxy had done nothing but prepare her for the day when survival would no longer be enough. By the time they understood, it would be too late. Every empire believed victory was measured in fleets and firepower. Every tyrant assumed that dominance came from overwhelming numbers and unrelenting strikes. They had never faced a human who measured success in patience, intelligence, and precision. She did not fight the way the galaxy expected. She did not fight to destroy. She fought to dismantle, to manipulate, to make entire civilizations collapse without ever drawing a weapon in anger. Every move she made was calculated, and every outcome was inevitable. She began by studying them. Not just the fleets, not just the councils, not just the maps, but the patterns of their thought. She traced alliances, predictable rivalries, the subtle rivalries that festered in corridors of power. She observed how greed twisted decisions, how arrogance blinded generals, how fear created hesitation. Every empire became a machine of predictable flaws, and she became the ghost in the gears. Nothing was random. Nothing was left to chance. She did not need to strike because she had already anticipated the collapse. Small disruptions came first. Trade routes failed inexplicably, supply chains faltered, and communication networks glitched at critical moments. At first, the tyrants thought these were accidents. They blamed each other. They accused minor allies. They did not suspect her, because humans had been underestimated for centuries. Every minor failure, every seemingly random setback, was part of a larger pattern. One by one, the empires stumbled into traps they had laid for themselves, never realizing that she had orchestrated the sequence from the shadows. She turned rival tyrants against each other without raising a hand. A secret transmission here, a strategically leaked rumor there, and alliances crumbled. Fleet commanders who had once boasted of their loyalty began to hesitate, questioning the orders of their leaders. One by one, empires made errors in judgment, exposed weaknesses, and abandoned strategic positions that had been deemed unassailable. It was a war fought entirely in perception, psychology, and timing. Her enemy's own arrogance became the instrument of their defeat. Her human forces moved silently, efficiently, adapting to every opportunity. They did not charge blindly into battle. They did not rely on brute force. They leveraged intelligence, precision strikes, and sabotage. Entire fleets lost operational capability without ever engaging in combat. Systems critical to logistics failed at key moments, starports shut down unexpectedly, and tyrants found themselves isolated in space with no reinforcements. What should have been chaos for her side became the enemy's unraveling. The galaxy was learning that humans could win wars without firing a single shot. Even when confrontation seemed unavoidable, she controlled the tempo. She allowed fleets to approach, only to withdraw at the last moment, forcing her enemies to overextend. She exposed weaknesses that they had ignored for centuries. Her reputation grew not from destruction but from inevitability. A single misstep, a single error, and the tyrants fell deeper into the strategy she had set in motion. They began to fear movement itself, because every action seemed to play into her unseen design. Her intelligence network extended farther than anyone realized. Humans embedded in neutral systems, merchants carrying information unknowingly, and covert operatives all became nodes in a network that moved faster than the galaxy could comprehend. Every decision she influenced, every action she anticipated, and every plan she undermined created the illusion of luck, when in truth it was calculation. The tyrants had no idea their defeats were not accidents. They were the result of human foresight. What terrified her enemies most was that she did not need to be present. She did not lead from the front. She did not issue threatening proclamations. Her influence stretched across the galaxy like an unseen tide, shaping events without revealing its source. A single word from her could disrupt an entire coalition. A single recommendation could redirect the outcome of a war. Humans had always been underestimated, and now the galaxy learned that their quiet resilience masked brilliance. By the time a tyrant realized a strategic position had been lost, it was already too late. Fleets were missing, alliances dissolved, and entire systems had declared neutrality or allegiance to humanity, not because of coercion but because of inevitability. Tyrants who had built empires over centuries were forced to confront the fact that they were not losing battles. They were being outmaneuvered at every level. The human commander had never fired a shot, and yet she controlled outcomes that should have required overwhelming force. She understood that fear was more powerful than destruction. She wielded restraint like a weapon, showing mercy when cruelty would have been expected, forcing the galaxy to question its assumptions. Tyrants had always relied on predictable human behavior: anger, desperation, revenge. She offered none of it. Her moves were calculated, precise, and unavoidable. Humanity did not strike out of impulse. They struck with certainty. Every hesitation in her enemy's actions became a tool she could use. Every miscalculation accelerated their downfall. By the end of what should have been open conflict, the galaxy had been reshaped without a single battle won in the traditional sense. Tyrants were exposed, weakened, and humiliated, not through force, but through their own flaws, exploited with human patience and intelligence. Her reputation became a shadow that stretched across every council chamber, every command deck, every war room. Every empire had begun to realize that they were no longer in control, that a single human had rewritten the rules of engagement, and that the galaxy would never see warfare the same way again. She had not fought their war as they expected. She had dismantled it, reconstructed it, and controlled it. The fleets were idle, the empires uncertain, and the tyrants were terrified, not of her ships, not of her weapons, but of the mind behind them. The galaxy had learned a harsh lesson. Humans did not need brute strength to dominate. They needed patience, intelligence, and resolve. And she had them in abundance. By the time her first actual strike came, it would not be a desperate act of retaliation. It would be the execution of inevitability. Every empire, every tyrant, every system would face the consequences of underestimating humanity. She had proven that restraint, strategy, and foresight were far deadlier than firepower, and the galaxy was learning this lesson faster than any fleet could flee. The galaxy had learned fear and silence, but they had not yet learned respect. Tyrants who once crushed entire civilizations under the weight of their fleets now trembled at the idea of a human decision. The councils, once brimming with arrogance, had become chambers of hesitation. Fleets remained docked, starports idle, and alliances faltered. The reason was no longer a mystery. The human commander had chosen her moment, not for destruction, but for revelation. She addressed the Galactic Council herself, though not in person. Her message was transmitted through encrypted channels, simple, unadorned, yet impossible to ignore. Her voice carried calm authority, devoid of anger, devoid of threat, yet every syllable left an imprint on the minds of those who listened. "You have underestimated us for centuries," she said, "and in doing so, you have trained us to understand you better than you understand yourselves. Your arrogance was your greatest weapon, and now it has become your greatest vulnerability." The response was immediate. Shock. Entire delegations leaned forward, trying to interpret the subtext. This was not a declaration of war. There were no ultimatums. No fleets moved to attack. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle, louder than any bombardment. It was a silence that carried the weight of inevitability. Every empire realized, in that instant, that humanity had not merely survived, it had mastered the art of control without violence. She offered terms, though not as a conqueror. She did not demand surrender. She did not demand tribute. She demanded understanding. "Coexistence is possible," she said, "but do not mistake it for weakness. Humanity will act, and when we do, it will be with precision, with clarity, and with finality. You have seen our patience. Do not test our resolve." Every word was measured, every pause deliberate. Tyrants could feel the power in the restraint, the force in the silence, and the certainty in her strategy. Empires that had planned for centuries of expansion realized that they were no longer architects of their own destinies. One by one, they considered their options, recalculated alliances, and measured every move with unprecedented caution. The human commander had not attacked, yet she had won. Entire fleets, entire worlds, entire civilizations recalculated their position not because of threat, but because of understanding. They knew what humanity could do, and that knowledge alone was sufficient. She revealed that her people had been preparing for centuries of underestimation. Every loss had been a lesson. Every betrayal had been data. Every destruction had been a blueprint. Humanity had endured, adapted, and now emerged as a force the galaxy could not ignore. And she reminded them, subtly yet unmistakably, that what they had assumed was weakness was actually the most formidable strength of all. The ability to act with perfect timing, and to strike when victory was absolute. The counselors understood, finally, that their fear had been misplaced. It was not weapons that had commanded respect, but intellect. Not fleets that had dominated, but foresight. Not threats that had compelled compliance, but inevitability. Humanity had rewritten the rules without a single direct confrontation, proving that true power lay in the mind, in strategy, and in the patient orchestration of events. The tyrants had a choice: cooperation or obsolescence. Some began to negotiate immediately, their pride swallowed by the awareness that they had been outmaneuvered. Others hesitated, clinging to delusions of past dominance, but even they understood that resistance was futile. Humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. Their patience had become a weapon, their preparation a shield, and their intellect an unstoppable force. She ensured that mercy was part of her victory. Tyrants were not annihilated, they were corrected, guided into positions that guaranteed peace, stability, and respect for human authority. Destruction would have been easy. Control without unnecessary bloodshed was far more effective. The galaxy learned that mercy from a human was as calculated and precise as any military maneuver, and infinitely more terrifying. By the time any empire dared to question her intentions again, humanity had already reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy. Alliances had shifted. Boundaries had been redrawn. Fleets were repositioned. Every species that had once thought itself untouchable now understood the reach of human strategy. They had learned that power was not just the ability to destroy, it was the ability to anticipate, to adapt, and to command without moving a single piece in haste. She left the galaxy with one final lesson: respect the underestimated, for patience can conceal inevitability, and intelligence can replace brute force. Humanity had struck without striking, conquered without violence, and commanded obedience without coercion. Across the stars, her name became legend. Tyrants who once thought themselves untouchable now whispered it in fear and awe. Humanity had risen, not by overwhelming strength, not by unchecked fury, but by being smarter, calmer, and infinitely more unyielding than anyone had dared to imagine. And the galaxy understood, at last, that the human race does not merely survive. It endures. It calculates. It masters. And when it acts, it ensures that the cosmos remembers why humanity is never to be underestimated. The name of the commander echoed through every council, every fleet, and every mind that had once doubted humanity. They had feared her before she moved, and now, in the wake of her restraint, they revered her. The galaxy had been taught the ultimate lesson. Humanity finishes what it begins, and it does so with a precision no tyrant can withstand.